Hello, Mr. Tony. Hello, David.
Pronto, ya estamos.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm fine. How are you? Good
Good.
afternoon.
David, good meeting you.
Okay.
Nice to meet you. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Well, thank you. Likewise. It's a pleasure for me to know that there's people interested in listening to this on a Sunday.
Yeah,
Great.
it's a long weekend.
Good afternoon.
Yeah,
Hi,
here it is.
Alejandra.
Hello.
Oh,
Okay. While we wait for the others, because this is a long weekend, maybe we can start with some of the presentations and introductions. Okay. So here, Alejandra and David, I have my friend, a very old time in Rio. His name is Antonio Plano, and he is going to tell us some things about his experience in the solar industry and also in the green, all these green deal and all these things. This is going to be very interesting for you, Alejandra. You are environmental engineer. No? Okay, so why don't you both, while we wait for the others, start saying very briefly, who are you? And then Tony is going to start telling us who is he. Okay? Welcome. So start you, Alejandra, please.
Good afternoon, Tony. Nice to meet you. My name is Alejandra Catacoli. I am environmental engineer and currently I'm working in Colombia for a project that is called Fondo Todos Somos Pacífico. And one of our programs is oriented to implement solar solutions to people that lives in rural areas. So I am strongly interested in your speech and thank you. Thank you a lot.
thank you.
Okay, thanks, Alejandra. Okay, David, very briefly,
Okay.
tell Tony who you are.
My name is David. First of all, I'm a student of International Business Administration and Supply Chain Management. I've taken some courses about eco-efficiency and reverse logistics and how the global warming is changing the world and the climate change is really interesting. So I'm really happy to have you here. And as a businessman, I'm really interested in all these petroleum crises that happened recently and all the new energies that are coming on in the future.
Okay, thank you, David. Here is joining us Carlota. So, Carlota, are you with us?
Hi everyone, how are you?
Okay, Carlota, please. Here is Tony. Very briefly, tell Tony who you are, and then he will start with his presentation. Please. We cannot hear you.
Sorry. The microphone is in mute. Hi Tony, I am Carlota. I am public accountant. I have a master's degree in corporate finance. I am partner of audit of KPMG. I have been working in KPMG for almost 15 years. I am married and I have kids, 8 and 5 years old. Nice to meet you.
Okay, thank you, Carlota. Okay, so now I'm going to leave you guys with my friend Tony, no, and he's going to tell many interesting things to us. Okay, Tony, all yours.
I really appreciate everybody making time, especially on a Sunday. I know it's tough. I know you guys have, you're lucky enough to have a long weekend. We don't have that luxury in the States, even though Monday we work. Tuesday is a very important day because we elect basically who's going to lead the U.S. for the next 4 years. And the two choices that we have are not quite the best choices on my book, but are the choices that we've given, right? So we have to make our best effort in supporting and going forward. When Ernesto reached out to me, I was like very much, surprised and also very welcoming to the idea of talking to you and giving you some of my background, specifically when it comes to the energy industry. My focus has been mostly in oil and gas, from also the production side, which is called upstream. And that's where you actually go and help capture the hydrocarbons that are sequestered in underneath the soil and the earth. And also, what do you do with, you can't, pretty much you can't use petroleum very well to power, things. So what you do is you basically go and refine it, and then you create fuels that mostly power industry and transportation. And so what I shared with Ernesto, since I've been on that field for most of my adult life, Ernesto and I were lucky enough to actually go study together at the American School in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And this is, I'm not going to say it, but it's going to be a couple decades ago, right? It's been a while. And it was great that we actually built a friendship. We also were the few that actually tried to speak Spanish, because most people speak Portuguese there or they speak English, right? So, Ernesto kept me sincere and honest about my Spanish. My Spanish is not as good, obviously, as what's spoken in Colombia. So I do speak Spanish, and if I have a doubt, I will say it in Spanish. So hopefully that's okay with you guys. But obviously my English wasn't as good as it is now. And coming to the States, I did have, when I applied to university to study in the United States, my idea was to actually be a chemical engineer and to then go work in Brazil in the sugar and act in the sugar processing industry. Brazil at the time, late 70s, early 80s, they were going through a period of putting alcohol and using alcohol as a fuel to power basically cars, mostly cars, but also light trucks, vans, etc. And alcohol, it was a great technology. I mean, that was invented way back when, but it's really ethanol. And ethanol is, what you get from fermenting sugarcane juice. So that was my idea. So I go to the States, I parachute in. I ended up going to a small school in Pennsylvania next to a steel mill. It was the largest steel mill in the United States at the time, called Bethlehem Steel. And that's where I went to school for 4 years. And partly through my career, I discovered that I didn't want to be a chemical engineer anymore. I didn't want to go back to Brazil. So I became an industrial engineer. But I do have a solid foundation in chemistry and physics. And as all engineers, you tend to actually apply math. And that's something that interested me early on. And I went into career in consulting. Interestingly enough, I actually joined a company called G. Back then, it was called KMG, Main Herdem, and it merged with Pete Marwick Mitchell, and they formed together what we know now today as KPMG. And I worked for KPMG at the beginning, mostly doing a lot of consulting work in operations improvement. And because I had a background in chemical engineering and chemistry, it was to actually help refineries with their uptime, with the reliability. Refineries are big machines, basically, that will take in petroleum or crude oil. They will distill it and frack it into different components, from gas to, are any of you guys smokers? Like, smoke a cigarette? If you're not, to worry about it. There used to be an old lighter called a Zippo lighter. The Zippo lighter had a fuel that you put in there as liquid. And that's basically one of the products coming out of the distillation column in a refinery. And then you have naphtha, you have gasoline, you have kerosene, you have diesel, you have asphalt, and you have what sometimes is called bunker. Bunker is the kind of the lowest of the barrel. Those are the products that basically power and fuel a lot of industry and transportation. And so when Ernesto said, "Hey, it'd be great if you could actually share your story and talk a little bit about what's going on in the world of energy," I'm like, great, let's point everybody to this chart that I love, which is basically a picture of the United States of how do we use what we produce in terms of energy. As you know, given environmental engineer that we have here, there are many sources of energy. but energy cannot be manufactured. It can only be transferred from one state to the other, right? And so our ability to capture energy and then do something with that energy to actually use it is what this chart represents. There's a different ways by which we can power basically what we know today as industry, and that benefits the markets, which facilitate transaction of goods and services, which overall increase our welfare, right? So if you go back to when we were like basically living in caves, and that's a period we call foragers, and we discovered basically how to tame and master fire. That transition of basically discovering the use of fire, discovering the use of wheel, allowed us then to become more of a farmer community. So we went from foragers to farmers. And farming allowed, big city states, you look at Rome and the organization and the welfare that went into creating Rome, which had 1 million people. And this is talking about, 2,000 years ago, right? Very, very sophisticated. It had a government system. It had basically the distinction of who did what and why and what value provided. Of course, it had slavery. It had all the things that, were back then acceptable. But again, I think what we did is we actually mastered not only the use of fire and the sources of that fire, we also mastered the farming and how do we basically give 1 million people food and water and maintain that going for a while until barbarians get to the gate, right? So, and destroy the whole thing. But that's a different story altogether. So we went from foragers lives in caves, and obviously when you live in a cave and you basically depend on hunting and killing the beast and coming in and cooking it, you don't get a lot of wealth. You're moving from place to place. You move where the animals are, and that's what you do. So you become a good hunter, and you become maybe if you're gonna stay in a cave after a good meal that you killed a big elephant or big something, right? You will then do your artwork in the caves, and you have that in Altamira. You have it everywhere, like in Spain and stuff like that. You have that kind of presence, right? It's that realization that we can do something with grains, and we can do something to actually create and manage fire to provide us a fuel and shelter that allowed us to actually then say we can manage with the fire, the threat of the beasts, and allows us then to basically start taking on a more nutritional diet in the sense of not only the meat from the beasts, but also from farming itself. So that allowed us to basically evolve, which is what this whole thing was all about. It's an evolution, right? You fast forward till about 150 years ago, and we were still pretty much dependent on sources of fuel from whales. We would kill whales like crazy to provide basically, the kerosene that went into lamps, and that's basically how we provided lights. The waxes that went into candles. And about 150 years ago, we discovered the substance. We didn't discover it; it was all the time. But we finally said, let's harness this thing. It's called crude oil. And crude oil allowed us to basically jumpstart basically our development and evolution from mostly in a farming community and a feudal system, and industrial revolution basically is what we were able to actually then develop and evolve into the society we have today. This revolution from a forager to a farmer to a fossilized fossil fuel industrial revolution maker is now being challenged with everything that we've created from the fossil fuels usage and bad usage in terms of the climate change that we're seeing right now. And so now, given all the technology advances that we've been able to do in the last 50 years, given basically all the challenges of an exploding population that we have on the planet, how do we provide the same level of welfare and better to 7.5 to 8 billion people that we have on the planet? Which if you go back 150 years ago, we only had what, 4, 3.5? So it's explosive growth. We want to create opportunities. We want to create basically the same level of welfare, if not better. We want everybody to have access to an iPhone or a Samsung or something, that you can transact in the market and create opportunities, but you have the only thing that you can do is basically power those things, right? And so that's the transition that we're living today. So if you look back at oil and gas, in the planet before COVID became a pandemic, we consumed about 100 million barrels a day. 100 million barrels a day of oil and gas. 20 of them were here in the US, and 80 of them were in the rest of the world. The producing companies, the producing countries, mostly in the Middle East, Venezuela was actually an important player, but given all the issues that they've been having with their, government transition, et cetera, and selections, they basically dropped their production by a significant amount. But what's been the phenomenon here in the United States has been the advent of new producing techniques. They haven't really been new. They've been around for a while, but now we have the technology to actually do the right things at the right time without causing a lot of environmental damage. And I'm talking about fracking. Fracking is something that, over the last 10 years, we've been able to actually master. And now the United States is producing almost to the amount of oil that is self-sufficient. Of the 20 million barrels that it needs, again, pre-COVID, it was producing about 18 and a half. And that's, from, you look at when Bush took power, and this is going back so it's 12 years ago. Is that right? 8, no, it's more. It's almost 20 years ago. It's amazing how time flies. That was, we were only producing about 5.5 to 6 to 7 million barrels a day. So we went from 7 to 18, yeah? And it's all through the advent of new development and production techniques. Like I said before, you have to actually process oil and gas. You can't just take it and put it in your car. You can't take it and put it in your kitchen. You have to do something with it. And that usually goes through a refinery. The refineries, like I said, the big machines, they operate a lot. And if you think about oil is, are you familiar with popcorn? ¿Cómo se dice? Palomitas de maíz, ¿cómo se dice?
Crispeta.
Maíz pira.
Maíz pira.
Dicen cancha también en Perú, ¿no? Creo, no sé. Anyway, a barrel of oil is like that. You get a barrel and it basically expands to usually, when you say 100 barrels becomes 120 gallons, 120 barrels of product. So it's usually an expansion coefficient with oil. And so what you do is you basically propel. What we use in here in the United States is mostly gasoline goes for cars, diesel goes for trucking and shipping, and kerosene goes for basically planes and air travel. Now, this is before COVID, right?
Mm-hmm.
We were also polluting a lot. If you think about it, 100 million barrels a day, that's a lot of pollution. And why is that a problem? Well, we went from carbon and the Industrial Revolution and the steam engine, and we're using a lot of coal, to petroleum, to gas. And what's next? Well, guess what? There's solar, there's wind, there's geothermal, there's hydro presas, dams, and so there's different ways of going about transforming energy, right? Where we are today is that I think we've actually figured out how to basically power residential electricity provision through solar and wind in a very feasible manner. Leaving oil to propel the transportation of cars. And even though there's been a lot of electric vehicles coming into the market, and I think that trend's going to keep on growing. If you think what goes into an electric vehicle, you have tires, you have the plastic that makes a dashboard, you have aluminum, you have some steel, and you have some glass. To make all those things, you still need petroleum, or you still need, you still need a source like coal or petroleum, or a dam that basically, allows you to produce the electricity needed to power something that melts steel, iron, aluminum, and make all those products. We haven't found an alternative yet to actually, if you think about basically, this is just energy conversion, okay? to melt steel in the most efficient manner that we know today, you need what is called an EAF, an electric arc furnace. You know, electric arc furnace comes in and it basically creates a lot of electricity, very, very powerful amperage. And basically we take in iron ore, you're melting it, and then you can actually create steel, melt it and make ingots and stuff like that. Just to power one electric arc furnace, for the average consumption, for the actual production of steel, you need a solar field of at least 10 square miles. 10 square miles. And that's just the conversion you have in today's technology. So where solar is coming in is actually to power the residential usage, but not for industrial uses yet. For industrial uses that require a lot of power and a lot of energy, you're still requiring the oil, gas, hydro, and nuclear. Nuclear is the other one that's actually, to me, it's the cleanest one. It's the one that offers the most potential to anybody. There's political agendas that keep nuclear very, very constrained. Texas is becoming a big producer of energy through wind and through solar. You're seeing Arizona, New Mexico, and those what we call the Sun Belt, transitioning to solar. And the good news about solar is that you can capture it. There's lots of land. It's not very densely populated like in the East Coast of the United States. So you can have these mega fields to capture the sun and turn it into electricity for powering residential and some vehicles as well. So I think that's the transition that's happening. And when you see where's oil and gas going, you still need kerosene to power airplanes, right? So most of the air traffic is powered by kerosene, and that comes from oil, petroleum. We still haven't figured out a way of actually coming up with airplanes that run on hydrogen, which is the next kind of clean energy that's out there. The production of hydrogen is still very expensive. We have an abundant source of hydrogen. If you just think about water, it's 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. So the chemistry works, but just breaking that bond takes a lot of energy to do that. So what we're trying to figure out is how do we capture solar, or how do we capture wind, or how do we aggregate both of them to then create hydrogen? And hydrogen can then take care of all the air traffic, and can actually replace some of that petroleum that we're talking about. So it's going to be interesting times. It's going to be fascinating times what happens in the next couple of years, because we're at that midpoint right now. When we went from foragers to farmers, and then we went from farmers to the industrial age of steam engines and coal usage and petroleum. Now we're going to the next thing is like, what's next? What's beyond fossil fuels? A lot of politicians and some of the choices that we have for president here in the US, the agenda calls for a Green New Deal. And the Green New Deal calls for basically an elimination of fossil fuel powered vehicles in this country by 2050. That's only 30 years from now. Is that possible? I think it very much can be done. Now, the making of the cars, the making of the buses, the making of the motorcycles, the making of the vehicles, you'll still need some oil and gas. However, the power plant of the car, the vehicle itself, can run on solar, can run on wind, can run on hydrothermal. So we're working that transition right now. And the complexity is that we've also, through our evolution, created a market. And a market is where you trade basically what you know or what you have to somebody else that needs it. And way back when, the wise people that we are, we created the accounting system that makes the market happen. And it's called the US dollar, or whatever currency you want to call it. Now, it is a contract. It is a contract that it's going to be backed by the Treasury to give you basically access to a good or service that you're procuring. And why we created that is to facilitate the market for propping up and being efficient as it can be. And allows for producers to go into it and barter and basically transact using the dollar as the proxy, right? So where we're going with this is how do we create, or how do we basically transfer our energy from a cleaner source, from the source we have today, at a way that actually mitigates the impact of the cost and the investment that we will have to actually take on. And so that's where you see carbon incentives, and you see a whole bunch of, ancillary kind of programs to mitigate some of that cost, and to also give you some tax rebates on the investments that you're willing to take to do these things. So it's going to be very interesting times ahead of time. I'm not saying that oil and gas is going to be done. I think it's going to be a transition, but it's going to be reducing. I think what's going to take on as we grow and evolve, we will demand more energy per capita. That's just a fact of life. And how do we replace the 100 million barrels a day with more solar, more wind, more hydrothermal? And so that's the challenge that we have. And what it is a challenge because there's political will, and there's also consumer will. If you compare the cost of our fuel in the US to the fuel that you buy in Europe, the same gallon of gasoline in the UK, in Ireland, in Iceland, in Sweden, you're paying between $8 to $10 per gallon. Today, I filled up my tank and I paid $1.80 per gallon. So that differential tells you those governments in Europe have decided to tax consumers for investing not only in social programs, but also in the next evolution of what the fuel sources are going to look like. We are not there in the US, and I don't think we're going to get there anytime soon, because I don't think consumers, given the geography and the density in the United States, people like to travel, they like to have their big cars, they like to have their, and so I don't think you're going to see that big a jump of going from $1.80 to $8 overnight. It's not going to happen. It's probably going to be something that's going to be phased in over time. And that dollar differential that the government's going to be enacting or collecting in terms of taxes on the fuel are going to go funding programs like the capture of the sun and also the wind to invest in those greener technologies. Any questions so far?
Yeah, I would like to ask you exactly if it is like more costly, like the cost of the solar and all these renewable energies, the cost is higher than the fossil fuel energies, or why exactly is not going that fast as it should be?
Yeah. There's a lot that goes into the cost. It's an investment, but there's also something called the BTUs. So what's the energy coefficient that you get from a barrel of oil versus 10 hours worth of a solar field that's 10 square miles? And you have to factor all those things in. So the good news is that the photovoltaic cells, basically solar panels, have come down drastically, because as demand increases, there's a lot more suppliers that want to get into the game. So there's investment dollars that go into it. So we have the ability to capture more solar, rays and turn it into power. But not everybody has access to solar. As you go north, you have not only less solar power, less solar exposure, you also have a lot of cloud cover. You have also issues that get in the way of for example, here where I live in Miami, you'd say, well, you live in the Sunshine State, that's Florida, but we wouldn't get as much sun in September because of hurricanes, because of just the trade winds alone. So we get a lot of cloud cover, and it's not as efficient as put it in the desert in California, Arizona, New Mexico. So over here, most of that is actually in the Rockies. Not saying that we're not having any here in Florida, but like I said before, if I'm investing and if I'm a government, I would fund nuclear as opposed to solar. That would be me. But the political will with nuclear is one that You know, it's, well, these guys are going to do that to create a bomb because they want to have a bomb so they can bomb somebody. And that's been the talk for the last 60 years. It is an unfortunate thing, but that's, the market is free, and the market is free as long as it has incentives from the consumer that will actually, feel that they're getting a good deal for what they're getting in terms of fuel. Few consumers that I know here in the US are willing to pay more because they're doing a good thing to society. In the end, you only have this much money. So what are you going to do with it? Are you willing to pay $8 for a gallon? Or would you rather pay $1.80 for a gallon? No, give me a $1.80 solution. I mean, I got to get to point B, right? So from point A, I'm going to pay as little as I can. It's like, yeah, but you're doing good for society. Yeah, it's good. Leave it to my children. And that's that's a little bit of the mentality here.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions?
Well, yes, I have a lot of questions for Tony, but no, really, first, tell you that it's the first time that I have this kind of map about the transition of energy, and you give me a really interesting point of view about how we as a society need the source of energy to improve our lives. So this is a really interesting point because it's not just to move to another source of energy. It's to understand how with this new energy I can achieve the same welfare level. So this is the deal. And as you told, it's an interesting way to see it because I am environmental. So we are like the people that say no more oil, no more gas. But okay, if you don't want it, how you can achieve the same welfare, the same level of life without that? So think in a transition, and it's really interesting this point. And also this is very interesting for me to understand that the first step that we can do is electrification and vehicles, because it's the most common I don't know issue maybe that we have to solve, because we are a lot of people. But for example, here in Colombia, the 5% of the people doesn't have the opportunity to have electricity 24 hours. Yeah, and give them energy is like a challenge. It's incredible because we can give them energy to the national grid because they are so far
Remote.
away.
Right.
So it's really difficult. So our transition today is give energy to them, and then we have to move in another source of energy. So really, really, really interesting that. And the other point that I want to highlight is this, to how transfer the energy that with the actual sources to a new or renewable or cleaner sources
Yes.
without a really hard impact into the market. This
That's the
is a
challenge.
really, really, really interesting question because it's not too easy. So thank you. I have now a lot of questions in my brain because your
Well, I think
introduction.
what you were saying, and also David was saying about basically the cost is always going to be an issue. Like I said, markets are perfect, or we try to make them as perfect as we can, right? And in comes the government and takes, we're not going to have this. We're going to have monopoly for this or that. And there goes the market. That's it. You're done. And what they're doing is they're basically acting as an agent for the welfare of the whole community, the whole society, right? The interesting thing about the United States is that we're a collection of 50 different countries. There's 50 countries in the United States. They're called states. So Florida is different than Georgia, than California, than Montana, and we act that way because we have different needs. You can't compare what I need here in Miami to somebody who lives in Wyoming and has a population density. In the whole state of Wyoming, there's only 500,000 people. We have 500,000 people just in 10 blocks away from here. So it's a different total concept. So if you go to Wyoming and you're expected to pay $8 a gallon and you have a big truck, they're going to say, no way, right? So it's very difficult to manage at a countrywide level. But I applaud the aspiration, at least from a countrywide level, that says we have to get, Colombia electrified by such and such date. I'm going to go back to like what I feel was the best president we had here in this country. Unfortunately, he got shot in Dallas too, and before I was born, so I wasn't the guy who shot him. But some people say it were Cubans that shot him, but that's to be seen. And that was Kennedy. Kennedy had a vision for this country. And without Kennedy's vision, and it was a transformative vision, and that was because of the Soviets putting Yuri Gagarin on orbit. Kennedy says, okay, that's meh, it doesn't impress me. Watch this. We're going to get someone to the moon, bring him back alive by the end of the decade. And sure enough, July 29th, 1969, Neil Armstrong stepped on the moon, took a couple, and then Buzz Aldrin, came over and did the same thing, took some rocks back, came back home. That vision, time bound, right? By the end of the decade. He said this in 1962, by the way. And so it led to the Mercury program, the Gemini program, the Apollo program. The Apollo program was finally the one that actually, with the Saturn rocket, got these two guys to the moon. And Michael Collins was just going around the moon, right? Why I'm saying this is that you have to have political will and a strong leadership to establish that vision. And the vision has to be success, define it. What are you talking about? 100%? Do you want 99%? Do you want 90%? What is that measure of success? And time bound. Kennedy said a decade. Well, guess what? You have to have, when do you want people electrified in Colombia? The same goes with California recently saying by 2035, we're not going to be selling in the state of California any more cars by gas. Done. So if you can still drive your car if it's powered by gasoline beyond 2035 because we'll have gasoline. But if you want to buy a new car, it has to be an EV, an electric vehicle. It's done. And so now, oil companies are saying, well, what does Exxon say? What does Chevron say? What does Shell say? And I say, hey, well, we got to bet on the new fuel because you can sign all the green deals you want. And as a politician, and the best politicians to me are those that don't think about these things, how energy is created, how much does it cost to move things around. And these are the two senators from Hawaii. We have in Hawaii two senators. Senators, you can opine all you want about what you think about them. I don't have high esteem for senators or for most politicians for that matter, but that's me. And these guys are saying, oh yeah, Green Deal, no more fossil fuels, fantastic, we'll sign it. And somebody says, hey, how are you going to get back to Hawaii? You're going to take a boat, a sailboat? How long is it going to take you to do that? Right now, you get on a plane in Washington, D.C., and 10 hours later, you're in Hawaii. Come on, guys. So some of those things, I mean, to your point, I think you said it, there's a lot of fanaticism, right? About, yeah, it's green, it's the best thing ever, and we can breathe fresh air. It's like, well, we're breathing fresh air right now, as it is. Yeah, there's a lot of pollution, there's a lot of waste. We could do a lot better. But what is it that we're doing to actually modify behaviors?
Excuse me.
Are we punishing? Are we hurting the wallet? What is that we're doing? In Switzerland, when you live in Switzerland, you want to throw a bag of garbage out. That bag of garbage is, it's cost you $5 to put it out in the curb to get picked up. You got two, it's $10.
Tony, let's go to the other session because this is going to be over.
Okay.
So please, let's go to part 2. So
All right.
I meet you there. Okay.
Sounds like a plan.
Okay.